So thank you very much for joining us. Good morning to you all. My name is Gethin. I'm Director of Employee Wellbeing at Benefex. For those that don't know me or haven't met me and the work that I do at Benefex, as a psychologist, I'm kind of fascinated by the ways in which we can make fairly small adjustments to the experiences our people have at work, and in turn how those small adjustments lead to big changes in the way that people feel, and obviously that impacts our cultures. And I think no more is that obvious than the way we recognize our people for a job well done. And recognition, if we look back in psychology and neuroscience, it's a core need that we all have as human beings. We have a centuries-long desire to feel included, to feel part of something, and to collaborate and support each other. And it's this kind of thinking that's led us to develop our market-leading recognition product. And today I'm joined by one of the team responsible for building it, Matt Nathanielsz. Good morning, Matt. How are you doing today?
Not too bad, thanks, Gethin.
So we have, as one of our product team, we've allowed you out into the light. So you're seeing sunlight, you're away from the tech. For those people that have never met you before, never seen you speak at any of the Benefex events, could you just give us a little bit about your background and the role that you do at Benefex, please?
Sure, thanks, Gethin. So yeah, good morning, everyone. As I said, I'm Matt Nathanielsz, one of the product managers at Benefex. I've got to say that I'm pretty thrilled to be asked to be part of this session. I don't do a lot of webinars, or certainly haven't done for quite a while, but this is particularly a topic that's very close to my heart. I personally don't think there's a more underrated concept than that of simply saying thank you, whether that's to a family member or a friend or certainly a colleague in this example. It's definitely an underrated thing and something that we should certainly not take for granted. Obviously, you've mentioned recognition as a product we've been developing or continue to develop and have been doing so for the last few years. And something that I personally have been lucky enough to be involved in since the very beginning, which is quite unique in terms of building products. But it's been such an exciting journey, and it's been great to kind of see and sort of help shape the development of the product. And obviously, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. And then kind of more on a work front, I'm probably a little bit biased when I say this, but for me, working in products is it's the very best job. Absolutely love it. I'm personally very passionate about products, but I think more importantly about building products that can have a positive impact on people's lives. I did that in a previous role. We were sort of trying to drive or sort of turn exercise into rewards. And we work with a lot of great organizations to do that. And particularly here with recognition, it's a really, really great opportunity to drive some positive change, particularly in the workplace.
And it's been great to see, for any long-standing Benefex customers that are listening, they would have heard you speak at our summer forum at the Kensington Roof Gardens, which no longer exists, many, many summers ago. I think within your first few weeks or your first month.
Yeah, early on.
It's great to see kind of that come full circle from conception to product that's being used by hundreds of thousands of people around the world. So yeah, I think that's a nice journey to have seen you on personally at Benefex. And what people probably don't know as well is my role within Benefex actually sits under product. So although I get involved in a lot of marketing, sales and customer success, I firmly see that when I spend time with customers, when I do the research, when I kind of do all the thought leadership, we're filtering that in as much as possible to the product teams that sit within Benefex to make sure that we're solving problems for customers, we're doing it in the right way, and we're taking that evidence and data-led approach. So I think that's really fascinating how we kind of pull those two worlds together to help create better products. We want this session to be as interactive as possible, so please get involved and send any questions or comments you have to Matt or I. If you use any recognition tools in your organization, whether they're digital or not, if you have your own experiences you'd like to share about recognition, please do. We'd love to hear how you do it. And as Matt said at the start, relatively rare opportunities to hear from our product team. So whether you use recognition or not, if you've been considering it, if you are a Benefex customer, if you're a prospect, whatever kind of situation you're in at the moment, Matt's been spending a lot of time developing this product and looking at recognition as a concept. So please, tap into his expertise today and ask him as many questions as you like. Now, before we get started, one of the most talked about aspects of the pandemic, I think, has undoubtedly been that shift to more hybrid working. And so while this was a trend that was gaining pace before any of us knew what COVID-19 was, it doesn't mean that many people still haven't struggled with this adjustment to this new way of life. One of our parent company, Zellis, issued a report recently called Handling Hybrid, and that was published in May this year. And their research found that 52% of employers said that their ability to adapt to hybrid working was either average or not very good at all. Yet of that same group, just 25% said their team was completely office-based before March 2020. And I think that kind of evidence brings to surface the confusion surrounding kind of what hybrid working is and how we handle that. And the fact that the last 18 months haven't actually been usual working from home conditions either. But reports like this, I think, do highlight that there's some common challenges around employee well-being, increased reliance on technology, employee engagement, how we collaborate when it comes to hybrid working. And while we know that there's data from the pandemic, before the pandemic, sorry, that kind of flexible and remote working was good for our health and good for our organizational culture, we can also see that things like social connectivity was challenged quite a lot for those people who are working in a hybrid fashion. And we have evidence that those individuals that are satisfied with the levels of social connectivity at their organization are 3.2 times more productive. So hybrid working aside, we can start to see that actually social connection is a really, really important part, not just of culture, but of productivity. And so I'll come to you with my first question, Matt. In the research that you were conducting before developing this product, how important was that kind of connection to other people in informing how you built the product and how it now sits as a kind of core function within recognition?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So I think it was massively important. One of the key aspects for us when we started to think about building recognition was ensuring that it was built with a really strong social element at its core. Obviously, private recognitions one-to-one are brilliant, they're great. But for me, the real value is in the social peer-to-peer recognition and the kind of social snowball effect that it can create off the back of that. As you start to bring people together to celebrate something positive and impactful like being recognized. What I mean by that kind of social snowball effect, if that term means absolutely nothing to you, if I say thank you to you privately, Gethin, obviously there's benefits to that, but ultimately that interaction is kind of where it starts and ends. But if I was to do that socially, then it starts to go way beyond the two of us. Obviously, your colleagues want to congratulate you. They see your recognition, they want to like and react and comment. Maybe your manager sees it and they want to congratulate you as well, and they want to add a comment and kind of reinforce that positively. And every time that somebody interacts with that recognition, those people are getting notified and getting nudged and are getting pulled back into the product, and they interact with it and they scroll the feed and see other recognitions for colleagues and people they know, or perhaps they don't know, and they interact, or it reminds them to recognize somebody that helped them out earlier in the day. And every time that happens, it's just pulling more and more people back into the product. They interact, they engage, and so on and so on. And it is just that kind of social snowball effect, as I call it, that we were trying to create when we were building the product. And I guess ultimately it's no different to other social apps that you think about, the likes of Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn, those kind of things. We're all kind of creatures of habit. Ultimately, using these types of apps has become second nature to it. We're drawn to it. We're kind of amazed by it. We pick these, our phone up and these apps, and we're stuck in there for hours and hours. But I think ultimately it's that we wanted to harness. It's that kind of innate desire to interact with people through technology. And it's certainly something that was really important to us when it came to building recognition.
And I think just generally within the reward space, kind of the reward function, whether that's benefits or any other part of reward, there's this growing trend, and I think this is going to be quite a strong future trend around social proof. So we don't just use these tools, we don't just use the benefits, we're able to see how other people have used those things and solve problems. And I think anyone that's listened to any recognition webinar that I've been involved in the last year, I've probably used this example a few times, but when we rolled out recognition internally at Benefex, what I was able to start seeing quite quickly was what was I getting thanked for, what were people thanking me for, and how did that align to our values. And the number one value that I get awarded for most is always learning. And that really started to change how I saw my place within the organization. So I started to realize that actually, if people saw me as a source of learning, can I lean into that more? And so as well as these types of events, I've been doing them internally for our members of staff as well. So additional training to see actually how can I offload some of this information and knowledge that I have. And so personally, just from my own example, I've seen actually that's made a difference. That kind of social proof means when people attend a training session that I've ran and they see, quite often people say thank you and they put that in recognition, it then prompts other people to say, oh, I should probably sign up for that as well. So it has much further reaching repercussions than I think any of us probably thought before we rolled out recognition. So I do think that kind of social proof in seeing this stuff happen is much more valuable than it just happening to you as an individual.
Yeah, and just to follow on that point with something kind of relevant, when you talked about the values that you were recognised against, like the always learning, for example, that's a really interesting piece, because when we recognition is a great way to launch or kind of promote your values. Quite often when we speak to organisations, they have values or behaviours or cornerstones or whatever it may be within the organisation, but they really struggle to kind of launch them or get their employees to really sort of buy into them and kind of live and breathe them each and every day, or certainly understand how well they're understood and how relevant they are to the people within the organization. But actually through recognition, where you're having to I want to recognize Gethin, and I need to think about a value to recognize you against, it's a great opportunity to see, okay, you've done something that's within the workplace and relevant. Now, is there a value that kind of speaks to that I can pull out? Okay, always learning because it's relevant, and I can go and recognize you against that. And then when we start to look back at the data, you can start to see the popular ones, and you go, okay, well, these ones are all people can understand how to relate everyday work-based actions to those values. But then on the flip side, you've got the ones that no one uses because they either don't make sense, they're too close to another one, or people just don't see how they're relevant. How do I recognize somebody against this value? It just doesn't make sense in day to day. So it's actually a great opportunity for organizations to kind of look at the data from it and kind of go, do we need to do some more work around the values? Do we need to change them, update them? Maybe we don't need these ones. Maybe we're missing something. So I think that's just a really good opportunity to kind of use recognition to say, kind of launch or promote your values.
Really good point. And so, what I wanted to talk about now as well is kind of what are the challenges and opportunities that employers have when it comes to recognizing more remote employees. So as we can see on the screen, we summarized some of the main research that's come out over the last 12 months or so. And what we're able to see is that remote working is good for well-being and it's good for productivity for the majority of people. So kind of big tip, that's a great thing the pandemic has shown us. But what we've started to see, as I mentioned in the last slide, that social connection at work probably plays a much more important part than we realized, and importantly, plays an important part in productivity. So again, you're starting to look at actually, well, if home working is great for productivity and social connection is great for productivity, how do we make sure both of those things are delivered at the same time? Because that's really difficult, right? The great things that the office delivers us or the workplace delivers for us are some of the things that we lose when we go from home. So how do we balance that, and how do we kind of bridge those gaps? But within some of these new opportunities, there are some challenges as well. And the data is telling us that most remote workers are saying that they need more recognition in this new way of working. We know that not many employees say they feel appreciated for what they did to get their companies through the pandemic. So there's a general feeling of unappreciation across a large swathes of the workforce, which is driving this new trend for the Great Resignation. And Benefex has written a few bits about that over the last few weeks. And around 20% of employees are saying that they are getting less recognition because they're working from home. Because those casual encounters where your boss walks past you or comes to your desk and says, great report, thanks for that work, that stuff has kind of disappeared. Those casual encounters, which probably were saturated quite a lot in thanks and praise, have kind of disappeared. And so this feels a bit like a perfect storm. We've solved some problems while creating new ones. And we've shown that actually, I think recognition has become probably far more important because of the pandemic. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I think back to the way that we built recognition and, a lot of the thinking that went in behind it, it was designed to try and help solve some of the problems that we felt currently existed for HR teams, but also starting to look at some of the problems that we could see were starting to grow or that we felt were starting to arise or we could potentially see arising in the future. Obviously, we couldn't predict the global pandemic was right around the corner, but obviously we could see that employees were starting to move further away from the typical kind of 9 to 5 in the office. And then eventually, we could see the concept of an office as such becoming far less fixed and rigid and becoming a lot more fluid. And naturally, power slowly starting to shift more in the employee's favor in terms of where to work, when to work, more flexible kind of working patterns and hours and things like that. So essentially, what the pandemic did was it fast-tracked that process for us. It forced the hand of lots of organizations to actually have to go fully remote and kind of take that plunge that probably maybe had seemed something a little bit in the distant future and not something they maybe thought they wanted to, needed to, could cope with tackling. And actually, it's just kind of move that needle along a little bit for us. So it was very much about what we could see happening, where it was going. But I think the pandemic has just kind of absolutely fast-tracked that and made a real big difference to kind of the timescales when some of those challenges were starting to become kind of more problematic or more prominent. Now, I think that's probably why we've seen great traction with recognition of late. Because when you can't be together all the time, when you can't be face to face with your colleagues, how do you continue to say thank you in a meaningful and powerful way? And ultimately, that kind of has to be achieved through technology. And I think particularly for managers, there's another great example that we hear a lot about. When they're sort of desperately trying to stay on top of their team that's probably now spread out, all across the country, or maybe maybe even in different countries. We're hearing particularly how it can be difficult to have things like one-to-ones. When you feel like you don't have that same level of visibility, when you can't see, as you mentioned, day to day, people moving around the office, the things they're doing, the meetings they're going to, the various bits and pieces that's going on. When you feel like you don't have that kind of day to day visibility, it feels a lot harder. But recognition is obviously now a great way for managers to kind of retain that insight, those everyday examples that are going on, where the team are going above and beyond, or even, it's just the smallest of things and they're being recognized for doing so. It's just adding kind of another layer of insight for managers that they possibly might have felt they were missing out in this kind of new hybrid world. So I think it is, it's a really interesting time at the moment, but I especially feel like the pandemic's had a big impact on that, particularly the timing of some of those changes as well.
Yeah, excellent. I think that's really, really interesting. And apologies for anyone who heard my building alarm went off at the same time as somebody started drilling, which happens almost every time we press record on any webinar. So apologies for that. I'm just going to quickly come to some questions. We've had some comments and questions come through. So Lee asks, thanks for your question, Lee. Good morning. One question I have is, apart from the recognition data, how do you check in with employees to ensure the platform still meets their needs? Are surveys taken so that platform can continue to evolve? So what have you seen with customers about getting people to re-engage with the recognition platform?
Yes, it's a good question. So I guess there's kind of a wide range of things that we try, and I think it varies depending on organization, but depending on industry, size of organization, and various different kind of things like that. But yeah, surveys, as you mentioned, is one way. I think there's a little bit on that later around kind of pulse surveys is a great example, being able to kind of at various points in time, be able to reach in and kind of grab that kind of insight from individuals. We have other things within the tool. Emotional resonance is another piece that, again, we'll cover a little bit later, where we start to kind of try and understand the impact that recognition is having on individuals, how it makes them feel. Is it still having kind of a positive impact on them? And I think as we kind of look at the data, particularly as we kind of assess it over time, you can start to understand how those shifts are having. And obviously our customer success team, they're interacting, almost daily with customers and the contacts there to understand from kind of a HR perspective, typically, or our main contacts within the team there that we deal with, how they're getting on, what's the feedback like, are they kind of happy with how things are going, or actually is there a great opportunity where we can start to share some more examples of how we can continue to drive engagement, ensure it still feels relevant. And it goes back to, there's lots and lots of different levers that we can pull. As I mentioned, are the values still relevant? Is there an opportunity to relook at the values? Have you launched on mobile? Actually, has the pandemic had an impact?
I'm not sure if we've lost Matt there, whether it's me. Are you back, Matt? I don't know if I went or you did. Sorry.
I did. I saw, see there, just my Wi-Fi suddenly dropped out. I'll hand back to you, but yeah, I think ultimately there's lots of different ways that we can do it, whether that's pulse surveys, relooking at the values, working with organizations, getting feedback, focus groups, and just ensuring that it's really relevant. And again, another way is, recently we worked with an organization that didn't want to launch on mobile, for example. It was just desktop only, but we found that actually there was a shift in kind of their demographic and their type of workforce and the types of things they were doing, kind of particularly post-pandemic. And again, they found that was a new avenue they could go to make the product more relevant and more engaging and more accessible for people.
Excellent, thank you. And we have another question from Emma. Thanks for your question, Emma. How do you recommend educating your employees to recognize everyone and be inclusive? For example, it's obvious to recognize the project manager who leads a project, but often forgot the finance, legal, procurement people that were equally as important. we often find the same more prominent employees are recognized again and again, but our back office staff are often not recognized. Really good point. So we went through a project recently where I was spending some time with a customer, and they basically told me that every interaction they'd had with Benefix had been positive. They had a great product launch with Benefix. They wanted to thank all of the product team, and they just said it was a really positive experience. I went onto our recognition app to thank the customer success director and the project manager, and I realized the same thing, that actually there's a lot of people involved in that launch. So I had to actually then go to the project manager to ask for a list of the names of everybody who was involved in that project. It was about 12 people. Then go back onto recognition and thank all of those people. But I guess that's that might not be as obvious to everyone, right? I think Emma raises a good point that sometimes, you know, you might have managers or project leads that might get all the glory. So yeah, is there anything kind of within the product or how you've built it that takes that into account?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, Emma, and there's definitely challenges. I think even, you know, the best technology will always have some gaps or some flaws or some challenges in terms of, you know, how do you engage everybody? You're always going to have those people that that don't always fully engage the product, or equally in this example, you know, how do you ensure that people are using it in the right way, or they have the access to the right data, or they, you know, they fully understand exactly, you know, who was involved in the project. So there's always, you know, lots and lots of challenges. I think one of the things is, you know, data is really important. One challenge we have is, you know, typically within, when you go in to recognize somebody, there's an option, you know, for example, to see, you know, teams. So you can look at a team, if you know it was mostly all of the marketing team, you can see everyone that's in there, but we sometimes have a problem with the data's not up to date. And actually there's people in the wrong teams, and we can kind of work with organizations to ensure that, you know, the data's correct, for example, so that we can make sure that everyone's kind of in the right place. So I think part of it is what can be done through the product. I think part of it is kind of is always going to be a little bit of a challenge from kind of an individual perspective as a sort of person, or as a user of the system. You know, ensuring that everyone's kind of recognized is always going to be, I think, a little bit of a challenge, and something we can't necessarily always control, ensuring that people obviously make sure that the right people are recognized as part of a recognition. So as much as we can through the product, we do try and obviously make that as easy as possible. I think that's the best thing that we can do through the product, is ensure that the data's right, the tools are there, things are easy enough to do, that you can select multiple people, that you can select a whole team, and all of those kind of things. But I think some parts of those will always be a little bit of a challenge in terms of ensuring that, you know, users make the right decisions when they go through and use the tool.
Excellent, thank you. And one last question from Emma. Thanks for your question, Emma. It would be great to get your suggestions for how to ensure a recognition platform is embedded in the whole company. We find that we have about 50% of our business that uses our platform regularly, but the other 50% seem reluctant to engage and use it. Any tips on how to engage the more reluctant users? I guess a challenge for any product manager, right, is how do you get people to use your products and use them regularly? I guess for my 10 pence, you know, where I've been able to encourage more people within Benefix to use it has been about owning your own personal development. So as I mentioned before, being able to see what I'm getting recognized for, if I'm doing great things for customers and they're saying thank you to the success director, who's then recognizing me, my app becomes a indicator almost of how well I'm doing my job. And if I look at it from that performance point of view, and if I look at it from a personal development point of view, I think people start to take their recognitions not just as that kind of social connection and being great and building a collaborative team that you like working with, but also almost a tick box exercise for your own personal development. You're starting to see, what am I doing well, and kind of how am I measuring myself? And because you can see how many times you're thanking others and others are thanking you, you can address that balance. So you can make sure, actually, if I'm getting recognized by loads of people, but I'm not really giving many out, I can start to redress that balance. And you've built some things into the product, haven't you, to try and pull people back in and remind them to because at any one point in our working week, there's going to be somebody we're going to say thank you to for something. So how do you kind of pull those people back into the system if they're maybe not as engaged as they either once were or ever were?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good point. And like I said, you're always going to have a portion of people that won't engage, particularly with work-based technology, and that's always a challenge. But I think you're always trying to drive that number to be as small as possible. So one of the things that we definitely find is that it can almost become, as an organization, if you're continually kind of, obviously promotion and communication is probably the number one thing you'd always say, ensuring that you're regularly communicating about the tool and the benefits and why it's important. As you mentioned about personal development, that's a great kind of lever to pull on. But I think it's nice to have a different voice sometimes. So rather than it just always coming from HR or from the top of the organization that's kind of pushing out content, actually let's go at a different angle. How low can we get? So managers is a good one that we always try and drive. Let's try and ensure that managers really understand the benefits of it. Let's target managers, let's get them using it. And I think if you can get them using it and then recognizing their teams more regularly, then that will have a great impact in terms of getting those people driving in. I think when you feel with any kind of product or anything at all, when you've got someone that you trust, that you appreciate, or that you kind of trust their judgment, if they're kind of close to you, like someone in your team or your manager that's using it and kind of being that person to kind of nudge you into the product, I think that has a much better impact, particularly on those people that are maybe a little bit more reluctant, unsure about it, not quite sure what it's all about. I think if you've got someone a little bit closer to you, closer to the ground, that can be that kind of person that's pulling you in, then I think that can have a really positive impact. So I would say, yeah, managers is a great one. Maybe have a look at some of the data and see if we can see, which your managers, are not logging in or are not recognizing, and let's maybe try and target them to see if they can be the kind of the drivers of that higher engagement.
And I would definitely add to that, the way we communicate this, right? We mentioned social proof before. We have case studies amongst our customers and with Benefex employees where somebody has got a thank you at a time in the day or a time in the week when they really needed that positive piece of light in their daytime, where, and I've had it where you get to the end of a long day, you're kind of a bit stressed, you're a bit tired and a bit deflated. And so getting that thanks from somebody, that acknowledgement that you did a good job or you're part of a successful team, genuinely does lift your spirits. And so I think showing those case studies where people are able to say, look, I did this and this is how it made me feel, and that kind of stuff, I think is really powerful as well. So you can show people that, you can be part of something really, really positive very, very easily at work. And I think part of those communications can be quite interesting. So Matt, let's talk a little bit about how our recognition product is built and why you built it the way you did. So this isn't a sales pitch at all, but I think for anyone considering rolling out new recognition tools with Benefex or anyone else, or adjusting their own, or just wanting to try to do some offline, not kind of tech-driven recognition, what can we learn from what the process that we've gone through and our experience in designing a recognition tool?
Yeah, so one of the great things when we started thinking about building recognition kind of at that time when we were kind of addressing the market was that the employee recognition space or industry or market was already huge. There was already lots and lots of recognition products out there, some good, some bad. But obviously a lot of people would possibly see that as a negative, but for me, it was actually a massive positive because it meant that there was already a bit of a baseline to work from. We weren't kind of stabbing around in the dark trying to see if there was, enough room, there was, a market for this type of product, or, was there going to be enough kind of interest from organizations? We could see straight away that it was definitely a space where the employee recognition part was absolutely massive and an opportunity for us to kind of advance in that area. So some of the things that were really important to us. So one was that we ensured we followed an evidence-based approach when it came to building the product. Given there are already lots of companies out there using recognition products, it was therefore really easy to understand what they liked, what was working well, but also what were the challenges that these products hadn't solved, which was still really important. I think a lot of people kind of miss that point when they start building products and just look at what's there and go, okay, well, if we can just do something that does exactly the same, then we're on to a bit of a winner. But actually, that only goes so far. Organizations, particularly if they have something already, if they want to move to something else, they want to see that you can do everything that their product does, but actually you address some of the challenges. You've kind of seen the problems that are still there, that are still causing a headache, and that actually you've got a product that can go beyond that and obviously kind of fill some of those gaps. And I think going through that process of just ensuring that we had all of that kind of evidence up front, it just created a really, really great opportunity for us to go in, build a product that was really, really impactful and meaningful. The second point, which is one I'll probably bounce across to you, Gethin, was that we wanted to ensure, it was really important for us, particularly from a recognition standpoint, because it's very relevant, is that the product had a basis in both psychology and neuroscience. As I say, it's probably more in your realm really for that one.
Yeah, so it's I think it's fascinating because I think there is a lot of academic evidence about what people want from work, and with all the research I've done, literally the thousands of studies I've read over the years, looking at what people want to be happy, content, well, and to fit in at work, I don't think has really changed for centuries. I think that it's kind of a core human desire to be recognized for a job well done. We want to feel included. We want to feel part of something. We want that kind of purpose and belonging. And it's one of the reasons why from an early stage, I was a big champion of us building a recognition product, because all the research I did for my book back in kind of 2016, 2017 was leading towards the fact that we needed more positive micro experiences at work. So we weren't thinking about the employee experience as this big problem that needs to be solved. We were thinking about, actually, there are micro experiences within that. And so the aggregation of marginal gains meant that the more positive experiences somebody has at work on a very small micro level, the bigger the overall impact. And I think recognition is a perfect example of that, because all of a sudden, I don't need to wait for my personal development plan. I don't need to wait for my boss to say thank you. I don't need to wait for a pay rise or a bonus or whatever it might be to be told I'm doing a good job. The people that are around me, the people I work with, are telling me on a daily basis, you did a good job there and you thanked me, and you're part of the team. And that breeds things like psychological safety, which we know is one of the, if not the most important factor in a successful team collaboration. And so I think that kind of stuff is really fascinating, and it really starts to show you that actually those small positive experiences that recognition can deliver on a daily basis play a big part in our productivity, a big part in our culture, and a big part of our individual well-being. And it also, we're saying thank you, right? We're expressing gratitude. So it's not just about the person that is receiving the recognition. When we express gratitude for something, that plays a really, really big part in our mental health, to the extent that in the UK now, you have general practitioners in doctor surgeries who are prescribing gratitude journals to people, because we know the impact at the end of the day of somebody making a note of all the positive, good things that happen that day. And that's effectively what I think we're doing through recognition, is you're basically allowing somebody to audit their work experience and find all the positive things that happened. So just by expressing gratitude to other people, we start to benefit ourselves. And there's a lot of evidence in neuroscience about, if I, following this webinar, which I will, say, thanks, Matt, for joining us on this webinar, part of me expressing that gratitude to you is, thanks, Matt, you made me look good. We had a great webinar, I hope. That actually does some good for me as well. It makes me feel like I'm part of something, and it bridges that emotional connection, which I think is obviously being separated because of a hybrid workforce. You and I haven't met up in the same room for over a year and a half. We have marketing people who are watching this call who we've never met. Neither you or I have never met, but technology has enabled us to start to have an emotional connection with each other, or to maintain that emotional connection. And I think that's pretty impressive. And I guess that one of the other points I wanted to talk to you about, you mentioned Facebook and things like that earlier on. How did that inform, right? Because people know how to use tech, right? There is a format that Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, etc., works. So how has that informed how we've created tech at Benefix?
Yeah, so one of the things that we were really keen on was ensuring that the app felt really intuitive. And for that, I think you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. When you think about people interacting, when you think about social engagement through technology, and particularly smartphone apps, you naturally do think of those social type apps that exist, Facebook, Instagram, and so on. So why not leverage everything that's good about those apps, everything that makes them so addictive and intuitive and makes people want to pick them up and, not put them down for hours on end. And we just saw a massive opportunity to piggyback off of the success that they've shown, create something that employees didn't see as just another boring work platform that they didn't really want to use, that they've been told to use, that doesn't look particularly appealing at all, but create something fun and social and interactive, and something that they felt like they would want to use every day. For us, the real kind of indicator of success for a workplace sort of application would be, when do people use it? If you find that the only time it's ever used is between 9 and 5, then that's fine. But for something that's meant to be more social and timely, that doesn't necessarily paint a good picture. So for us, when we can see that people are recognizing colleagues over the weekends, or early hours in the morning on their commute to work, or whenever it might be, certainly outside of the core hours when you think they're probably not at work. That's a really good indicator for us that we've created something that people feel they're happy to pick up and use at kind of any time of the day, whenever they feel like it really makes a difference. And probably the last point that I just wanted to kind of mention that was kind of relevant for building the product was around data. Just a quick point, really. I think the power of data just cannot be ignored. I think too many people try and build or improve products without having the right amount of data to be able to make the right decisions. It's easy to just decide to do something, to add something, to build something. But if you haven't got any data to back it up, you're very much stabbing in the dark as to whether you're going to make the right decisions. So for us, it was really important to understand as much as we could about what was important to employees and employers, what their biggest challenges, what were the pain points, how do people like to interact, what's good, what's bad with what they currently have. And all of that just allowed us to use data to guide our decisions when it obviously came to making the product and ensuring that it was going to be as successful as it could be.
Excellent, thank you. And data is a fascinating one, because I'm not entirely sure we ever really think about data when we think about recognition. So kind of why is data so important? Kind of what are the benefits to knowing who's recognizing who? Kind of what can an employer gain from that kind of data?
Yeah, data's, as I mentioned, it's really, really important, but it's not just, kind of data for data's sake. Data on its own isn't, the be all and end all. It's what you can do with the data and what the data can tell you. Ultimately, it's kind of insight, to kind of give it a bit more of a meaningful word that you're looking for, or as I would say, it's sort of actionable insight. If you've got data that you can draw some insight from, that can kind of lead you to go and perform an action that it's very obvious that, okay, I can see there's a problem here or something, I can now go and intervene, I can go and have a conversation, I can go and recognize somebody or whatnot based on the data that I can see, then actually we're using the product to drive the data to then go and perform, some action or, a behavior that's going to have a positive impact, so that when that loop comes back around, we're starting to close the gap potentially. So I think for us, data and having useful data is obviously really, really key. And I think in terms of data, there was kind of two elements that we kind of looked at. So one was around, what can we draw out of the data that kind of speaks to interaction and collaboration between teams particularly. And within that, kind of who's recognizing who. Are those people in the same team? Are they in different teams? Or are they in different departments or different business units, different office locations, or even countries? And what does that actually tell us about those interactions? Is it something to be expected? Is it painting a different picture to the one that we thought existed? Why are these people in different offices recognizing each other? What does that mean? Is that, is that something that we expect? Do they work on different projects, the same projects, and actually it's kind of understandable? Or actually they're completely separate and there's no kind of reason that makes sense for them to interact, but that something has brought them together. And actually it's this type of data interaction that you can start to pick out that's really, really useful. But it also wasn't just at at a kind of a team level. We were particularly interested in what the data might look like from a user level. And that visual that was just playing on the screen there that you might have seen speaks a little bit to that. So what we wanted to do was try and pick out kind of two ends of the spectrum particularly. So one was around, could we identify the champions, for example, within a team? Could we see those individuals that were really driving engagement through being like this kind of social linchpins within the organization, and recognizing lots of people, and you could see them really standing out? And what could you do by knowing that information? Could you use those people to help drive change within the business, or help be part of a voice for anything that you want to get across to individuals? But then on the flip side, could we highlight? Sorry, go on.
No, so I was going to say, but just to pinpoint that, because I think that's a really important point, is that when we look at kind of change in any organization, and we've had huge continuous change for almost 2 years, finding those champions, those people that other people like and respect and listen to, is a really, really important part of any change management process, getting those people to champion what you want to do. And so I think any tool that enables to identify those people is really, really important. And I guess the flip side of that is, like you're seeing on screen at the moment, is you're also able to find outliers, right? So you're able to find people that maybe aren't recognizing or getting recognized, and that can start to inform you, actually, is there something going on with that individual? Why aren't people recognizing that individual? Why aren't they recognizing others? Are they not acting as part of the team? What's the root cause for that? So I think from a reward perspective, having access to this kind of data, incredibly valuable to the reward function, but even more valuable to the HR function. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's that. There's kind of two sides to that argument. Can we see those champions? But then at the same time, who are those people, the outliers? Who are the ones that maybe the data can show us they might be at risk of leaving because everyone around them is being recognised, but maybe they're not. And as a manager, they're doing a great job, and maybe there's an opportunity to kind of step in and intervene. And I think with that visual, just to kind of a little bit of context to that, that's kind of showing, for the last 1,000 recognitions or something like that. These are all the individual people that have been involved in this organization. The colors represent the departments. So as a snapshot, you can kind of see where you've got like all of the oranges down towards the right, very, very closely grouped together, and the light blues up at the top there, they're closely grouped together. So their interactions and their reactions are very much all within the same teams. They've probably got, a close knit integrated team there, and they're recognizing each other regularly. But then others like the dark blues, for example, or the purples, they're more kind of spread around. So it's less so about interacting and engaging and recognizing each other, and more about kind of wider networks within the organization. And again, you kind of have to look at the data deeper to understand what that means. So that could be an IT or an employee technology team. And actually that makes sense because they're interacting with helping lots of people from across the organization. So they're naturally being recognized by people in lots of different departments. So that team, in terms of their interactions, is more spread out. But actually you might find that isn't the case, and it's more of a siloed team, you would have thought, that works more kind of closely knit in a particular part of the business. So maybe that's kind of just unlocking some insight you didn't know, that they were more kind of integrated with the wider business than you thought, or perhaps the other side. So I think this type of data it's really just the tip of the iceberg, but I think we're starting to see more and more insight be pulled out, and then starting to look at, okay, what can we do with this? How can we kind of educate and help teams and organizations to drive positive change through the data?
Excellent, thank you. We've had a question in from Yulia. Thank you very much for your question, Yulia. Thank you for joining us. Would you link gratitude and recognition to performance management systems in some way, or keep those separate? I can see the argument either way. Would love to hear your thoughts. So if I can answer that one, I think they should be. I think, when we measure anything in the workplace, it always feels like we are measuring subjective and objective measures. And so they're the kind of hard facts and data, things we can measure that will give us an idea of somebody's engagement, for example. And then there's this kind of less data-driven, softer stuff. So, lots of employee surveys are kind of pretty subjective. You're asking people how they feel about the organization. We used to think that if somebody turned up every day and they did their work, that they were happy with the organization. And those kind of objective data, that doesn't really necessarily tell you whether somebody's engaged or not, just because they're turning up. In the same way that from a product perspective, just because somebody uses the platform every day doesn't mean they like it. They might use it because it's task driven and they have to use it. And there's a great TED talk by Margaret Heffernan, which talks about the most interesting things that happen in the workplace are the stuff that we can't measure in the traditional ways. And I think that's one of the things that recognition gives us, is this kind of softer, subjective measure of how do people feel, how included are they? Because we can ask them, and the data might tell you that, somebody might say, yes, I feel engaged at work. Yes, I feel part of a team. And they could give you some of that kind of survey data. But when you compare that with recognition, I think you start to build a richer picture of how that person's performing, how included do they feel, maybe how belonged do they feel to the organization. And so I think having those two together just gives you a more rounded view of that person's performance and engagement level. So I would absolutely say that I think you should be bringing both of those data sets together. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Matt.
Not really. I think you've answered it. I was literally going to say exactly that. I think you don't want just data for data's sake, but I think where you've got relevant data that you can bring together, I think just having another layer to it, just to give you a different perspective, I think it's really powerful. So I think performance management with recognition give you an opportunity to see potentially the impact of being recognized, what that has on someone's performance. Particularly if you're tracking the two over time, you can see a level of performance management for a period of time, and then you introduce recognition, for example. What impact does that have on someone's performance for those that are being recognized versus those that are not being recognized, for example? I think that's sort of the type of insight that's quite interesting. You can see the impact it's having.
And it's whole organization view, right? You think about my example where Benefex is telling me they're learning from me. That wouldn't necessarily have come out in my one-to-one with our CEO. So all of a sudden I'm getting the view of much more people into how am I performing rather than just my manager's view of how am I performing, which I think is quite compelling. Conscious of time, so very quickly, I just wanted us to talk about the model of recognition that we've built at Benefex. In our kind of research and our collaborations, we've taken employee well-being, employee experience, psychology, and as you mentioned before, we use that to inform how we build product. And so I just wanted us to take the audience through what we think are the important elements of our model of recognition and use that to show how we've taken kind of evidence to build leading products. So if you could start with channel, could you kind of just take us through some of those points there very briefly about how we built the product that way and why those bits are important?
Sure. So the first one there, mobile first. So that was really important for us. We adopted a mobile first approach when it came to building recognition. We felt that it was crucial that something like recognition had a great mobile experience. I think the nature of recognition is really crucial, that recognitions are timely. So ensuring that people have got access anytime, anywhere to pick up their phone and recognize somebody was really important. On top of that, it's obviously crucial that we have desktop support as well. I think more so than ever now in the current world, less people on the go, more people kind of static. We've actually seen a massive spike in desktop usage over the last 18 months, which kind of makes sense with I know I use the desktop version of recognition more so than the mobile app now that I'm kind of more stationary. So again, that's really, really important. And I think the overall user experience has to be as seamless as possible. So we do look at a lot at integrations, particularly with other HR tech systems, and that's kind of an area we're starting to grow out. For example, Zealous HCM Cloud is one example that we do integrate with. And there's one example where they do bring together recognition data with payroll data and other benefits data, for example, and performance management data. And they do a lot of analysis, I know, on that data to kind of see how one impacts the other. So, you know, kind of how we reach people and those various experiences that we create. I think that's really, really important within the kind of the channel aspects.
And type, you've mentioned some of those kind of formal, informal recognitions, interactions in the past. How important is that? The informality of it might come as a surprise to some people. When we first rolled this out, the inclusion of gifts, we had kind of law firms and financial institutions saying we can't be using gifts in the workplace. But why is that important? Why is it important to add that element of kind of fun and entertainment to this?
Yeah, so we thought it was really important to go down two avenues, formal and informal. We absolutely started with the informal route. We felt that was kind of the bread and butter for the product and what would really drive the social kind of fun, intuitive aspect. And that's very much the kind of social peer-to-peer recognitions. And as you say, the use of GIFs, images, memes, videos, emojis, all of that is really fun. It's lighthearted. It's a great way to make the product fun and engaging. We didn't want it to feel like a really strong, formal, rigorous process that, like you say, if you wanted to thank me for helping with a webinar, if you then had to go through a really kind of boring, long-winded process to do that needed some approvals and it was all very formal, you might think, you know what, I'm just not going to bother with that. But actually, if you can just open the app or whatever and say great job, blah blah blah, add a funny gif in there and a smiley face and post that, you're more likely to do that more often, because actually the small everyday things are what's really important. It's not the big thing that happens once a year. So if we felt like we could make that informal piece really, really powerful and easy to use and engaging, that would have a great impact. And obviously things like likes and reactions and comments feed into that as well. But then quickly on the flip side, we've more recently introduced the more formal aspect, which is award nominations. So that is slightly more formalized, but hopefully still fairly simple and intuitive. You can nominate a colleague for an award. That's kind of reviewed against the criteria. It can be approved and rejected. And then there's a kind of an automated process to announce the winners and distribute rewards. We know that was a really big pain point for organizations to go through all of the various award processes. A lot of it's offline and in-house stuff, where through the recognition software, you can just make that all really, really simple. But again, it gives you that kind of formal and informal process as well, which is kind of a nice blend.
And the kind of psychological drivers, I think we've probably covered quite a bit in previous webinars as well, and we've got lots of content about that. Kind of, what about the kind of how it's based on? Because obviously, marking people's kind of milestones has been a common place for kind of reward recognition. We've built that into the platform as well, so people can take that traditional aspect. But as we mentioned, kind of, we've tied in some of those behaviors, as you mentioned as well, so we can award people for demonstrated the behaviors we want to see more of.
Yes, so for our term of milestones is probably more commonly known for lots of organizations as sort of service-based awards or long service awards. But we've tried to make it a little bit more relevant, a little bit more flexible, because the more traditional method of 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years service is not necessarily relevant to lots of organizations. Obviously it is for some, but obviously for lots of organizations 2-year service might be a significant milestone. So we tried to make it more flexible, where we have some organizations that they have a milestone for reaching the end of your first week and celebrating that, and that's something positive. Your first 100 days, your first 50 weeks, whatever it might be, but then also have the capability for the longer 1, 5, 10, 20, 50 years as well. So it was more about being flexible, ensuring that milestones were relevant to the organization, to put the power in the hand of the organization, and we work with them to go, okay, for your organization, your type of workforce, what's a milestone to you? What are the things you want to celebrate and you want to reinforce? And obviously we can build those in, and they can say they could be days, weeks, months, or years. And the behaviors, as I kind of mentioned before, is very much about just using recognition to link behaviors and actions to company values, and then expressing them through the product. So it's just a really, really great way to ensure that people can kind of create this evidence log or sort of trophy cabinet of all of the great things that are going on across the organization. And from an organization, it's just reinforcing, all of those great things, particularly through the use of values.
And lastly, defining attributes. So we have a reward element, that was in the little demo that played on screen. It's not just about the peer-to-peer recognition. There is another piece that can be added to that. What's the kind of difference, and why both of those are equally important, the monetary versus non-monetary rewards?
Yes, it's a really interesting piece. When we first built the product, we went solely non-monetary because we felt that is the big piece. There's a lot of research out there that will show that ultimately employees just want to be told they're doing a good job. More than anything else, that really means something, particularly when it comes from a peer or from a manager. It doesn't necessarily have to be something formal from the top of the business, although that is obviously very powerful as well. And whilst monetary reward can be very powerful, it's actually can be quite short-lived. And again, there's a lot of research around that if you just received a £20 voucher, you go and buy something and you kind of forget the value of that. And it's not something you necessarily relive in your mind, months and years later, but actually being publicly thanked, congratulated, kind of awarded by a peer and done sort of socially across the business, that will last in the memory a lot longer and mean a lot more. So whilst monetary is absolutely important, we've got a great, sort of simple and intuitive reward experience with the product, we really do push the non-monetary piece and the social piece first. We feel like that's where a lot of the value is for us, certainly within the product.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And so for anyone who is interested in anything we talked about today, you can download our guide to recognition for hybrid teams. You can download that from hellobenefex.com. You probably also find it on our socials, or if you need to get hold of a copy quickly, you can just email hello or info@hellobenefex.com and we will send you a copy. And it's got all the information we covered today, including some of the models that we've gone through and some of the evidence. Before I let you go, Matt, I've recognized you for your support in this webinar. I can also see that you've been thanked by our marketing team for this webinar as well. So hopefully that proves that it makes a difference to your day. This is all we've got time for. Really appreciate all of your questions. Thank you much for being so involved and for staying with us for the full hour. And thank you so much, Matt, for sharing your insight with us today. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Gethin.